is Adam Duff, and it has been a while since I put out a video. I've been quite busy, as I'm sure you have been as well. Now, this is kind of something new I want to work on, and that is a series of videos, and I'm going to be posting them directly on my site because I just put up a new website. You can go check it out, adamduff.com. I'll link it in the description. And the idea behind it is to actually create a bit of a forum. I was a little dissatisfied with the fact that I was producing videos, but it's kind of a here's what I do, take what you can take from it. And I feel that everybody, all of you as a community, can get a lot more out of it, as can I, if we have a bit of a forum where we can discuss this artwork, we can offer our own feedback, we can ask questions on it, and all that kind of stuff. And not only that, but get a chance to meet other artists and make friends and all that kind of cool stuff. So that's the idea behind it. So if you go to adamduff.com, all of my video updates are going to be there as well, including forum section. I'm really excited about it. And so yeah, so let's jump into this piece of artwork. The idea behind it is character development. This particular tutorial and the ones that are going to follow are based on character design, which is my strength, I would say. I'm much stronger as a character designer than an environment artist. Of course, due to my background, worked in character animation and all that kind of cool stuff. So in this particular piece, you'll notice that I did start it, as you can see here. I started it as an illustration. The idea was to have this kind of huge demon in the background with this army of demons that were kind of marching in on this village, this kind of this outdoor merchant, like kind of merchant center type of thing. I wanted to make it look very old and like kind of a human village that these demons were walking in on. But more importantly, I was focused on giving each one of these characters a distinct personality. Each one of these characters needed to be able to hold their own ground. So very much approaching this as a character development piece. Now later on I decided to extract them from this background and work on the characters alone, so I could devote more attention towards their personalities, their design, so on and so forth. Now, just to give you a little quick glimpse into the thought process behind it, if you've watched any of my other videos, I'm very big on visual narrative, on storytelling, and that's something that translates not only to environment work and illustration work, but also into character design specifically. I'm very big on injecting a story into my characters. Now, why is that? Because it's a very powerful tool to add depth, not only in terms of personality, pose, body language, and all that stuff, but from a design perspective as well. When you can get into the story behind a character, you start to understand and you start to be able to explore how they dress or how their bodies are shaped, all of these things. So it's when you're working from this fashion, you're working from more of a visual storyteller's perspective, you are giving yourself a lot more fuel for your imagination. You're allowing your imagination to really run free and develop these characters with a lot more depth. Furthermore, if you really delve deeply into personality and what's the driving force behind these characters, and you push that concept, you don't just kind of graze it on the surface, but if you really push that idea, it really allows you the ability to create characters that will impact your audience more. There's thousands of artists out there that could produce beautiful, quote unquote, beautiful artwork, aesthetically, technically fantastic stuff. But the stuff that I've experienced through my life, the stuff that I find I gravitate towards more when I'm checking out the artwork of others, is the stuff that hits me emotionally. You know, how many people have designed dragons? But if you design a dragon that has a very strong personality and plays a very important, significant role in that particular scene, he's not just a quote unquote cool dragon, you will identify with them on a much more personal level. A very good example is check out the works of John Howe, for instance, from one of the main Lord of the Rings artists, right? He studied the background, he understands the personality, the purpose behind dragons, the lifestyle, the lore. And it's that attention to story, to narrative, to history that um, that grants him the ability to create concept artwork and illustrations that are far more evocative, a lot more powerful, a lot more meaningful. So that's something that I'm going to be emphasizing a lot during the production of these different characters. Now, as you can see from a technical standpoint, how I'm approaching the color, lighting, etc., is based on an environment design, right? Is based on a full illustration. The lighting and the colors that I'm picking are harmonious with the background, but the way that I approach the design and the lighting of these characters allows me to extract them where they can function as a standalone character in and of themselves without being dependent on their background. And there's several techniques that I use to do that. All right. Now, before I actually get into the physical aesthetics of how these the technical aspects of how these characters are created, I want to talk a little bit more about personality, because the personality, the narrative behind each one of these characters, is what is helping me decide how I want these characters to look. It's helping me decide where I put certain things, how I dress them, how I pose them, so on and so forth. So in these three characters that I'm going to be starting off in this video, are Anguish, the guy in the middle. The one I'm working on right now over to the right is Burden, and I'm going to be working on Suppression as well. So I'm actually working on three characters in tandem. Now, the way that I'm building these characters, the way that I'm designing these characters is a little bit different than how you would see me doing a straight to character design piece. That's something you're going to be able to see later on. But the reason why is because I'm thinking about the overall composition and the overall balance and harmony of the piece. I'm bouncing back and forth between one character and the other very regularly. I'm not focused on one character and nerding out with all the details. I'm adding a little bit here, there, back and forth, a lot of flipping around. Okay. You'll also notice that at certain points, parts of the background might be thrown in. That big creature in the background might have been worked a little bit. You kind of see it pop, but I left out the stuff that wasn't significant that wasn't strictly character development work. Okay. Now, Anguish. Where did I get the idea from Anguish? Anguish um, is based on based on something that happened to me when I was around 25 or so. I was coming home late at night, and I indirectly got sprayed by a skunk because one had crossed my path. He sprayed the air. I moved out of the way, but then I ended up going back through that quote unquote cloud of stinkiness, and I got it on me. So I smelled like a skunk for 3 days. Real pleasant stuff. Now, it was probably around 1 o'clock in the morning. I had believed, like a lot of people believe, like you probably believe until I tell you, that tomato juice gets rid of the smell. Well, I found out that night that it does not, because I went into my fridge looking for a can of tomato juice, and luckily, so to speak, I found a 3-liter can of freezing cold tomato juice that hadn't even been opened yet. Probably been sitting in my fridge for about a month or so. So I cracked it open, and there I am in my bathtub at 1 o'clock in the morning, exhausted, um, pouring ice cold tomato juice down my head, down my shoulders, dripping down my neck, down my back. It was an extremely painful experience. It was like having thousands of shards of glass jabbed into my back, into my neck, into my head. Very sensitive parts of your body when it comes to that type of pain. It wasn't only a pain that was physically painful, but it was also the type of pain that created a high level of anxiety. So that was kind of the type of pain I wanted to inject into this character. Pain that is as much psychological as it is physical. It's not like stubbing your toe. You go, oh crap, I just stubbed my toe. Ooh, that hurts. Shake it off, and it's gone. It was a pain that made me upset, made me emotionally upset. And that's kind of the idea behind them. Because they're demonic figures, I wanted to delve into the world of suffering, different types of suffering. I even looked it up and researched it a little bit, and a lot of that suffering has to do with, when you look at the religious sides of suffering, just by researching it online, wiki or whatever the case might be, you quickly come to learn that there are different types of suffering, at least as described through literature. And there is religious suffering, all that kind of stuff. But there's also um, um, inflicted suffering, pain suffering that's caused to you. You are a victim of a certain type of suffering, like somebody hurting you, somebody insulting you, that type of thing. Versus empathetic um, suffering, which is a suffering that you witness somebody else experience. You're witnessing a victim of bullying. You're witnessing a victim of violence, of abuse, of being insulted, of being trolled. You are suffering too because you're experiencing it empathetically through them, right? If you have a sense of empathy. If you're a sociopath, that's a different story, right? These characters are the sociopaths. Each one of these figures are sociopaths. They are characters do not that are not affected by you suffering. They are they enjoy it. They either enjoy it or don't even understand or empathize with your pain. So they're the type of characters that will see you suffer. They'll see you grovel. They'll see you cry. They'll see you moan and just keep doing it, right? So that's the kind of you can see that we're already starting to delve in quite deeply into narrative. And by thinking in that respect, you can take your brain away from thinking of form so much. Of course, that always exists in the background, right? As you can see, not thinking so much about form and all of the technicalities. You're always leading from, at least in the character creation process, you're always leading from your imagination. You're leading from an emotional place rather than a technical place. And in my opinion, that's always a far better way to create characters, right? Because it's all about quote unquote character. You're a character designer. You're not a figure designer, right? We're not building ships, we're making living creatures. So we have to bring the human element into that. And emotion is what creates a human connection. And by creating that human connection with your audience, you're allowing your audience to identify and appreciate your artwork that much more, be it positive or negative, right? In this particular case, we're kind of, I'm exploring our morbid sense of curiosity as human beings. I'm not creating characters that are just aesthetically cool. I am, as George Carlin would say, driving down the street and you see a car wreck, he's the type of guy who will say, bring me closer to the bodies. My wife has never quite seen somebody in that shape before. It's that, why do we watch, catastrophes and shootings on TV? It's because we have a morbid sense of curiosity. And that's what I want these characters to reflect that morbidity, right? I want them to reflect that although they're unpleasant to the eyes, there's something about them that makes us feel compelled to keep looking, right? In order to do that, they have to be aesthetically detailed. They have to have a lot of information. There has to be a strong narrative. But that narrative has to be something that's challenging to the viewer. This is definitely not something for young children. This is something that would just quite simply uh, offend kids. For an adult, it would offend them, but they wouldn't necessarily look away, right? They would go, that's kind of interesting. And funny enough, when I was finished these designs, although I delved deep into that narrative, the reaction I got from people was cool. People thought it was very cool artwork. Why? Because it was emotional, because there was a certain sense of people could identify with it. Same reason why we watch Walking Dead, right? It's exactly that reason. So these videos are short, so I'm not going to get into the aesthetic aspects of this so much to the point because I don't have enough time. I'm going to be digging into that after. But as you can see, just to give you a quick glimpse into how this was put together, I use a dark bass tone, unlit, quote unquote, right? I added a base pass of color and light just to establish those basic three-dimensional forms and help me kind of start to establish what the anatomy of these characters were. And then I added a backlight to further enhance, to make them pop a little bit more because that light is coming from the back, and then a front light, which is a warmer light to hit the front, the opposite side, to help really establish those three-dimensional forms, and furthermore, create a nice warm, cool balance between the two colors. So each character could be a standalone. You would actually stop and analyze each character. They're not just extras. They have identity. They have a purpose. They are the purpose of this piece. To get back to narrative, the guy over on the left, the little guy who's hunched over, is going to be Burden. And the idea behind that was, when I was a young kid, I went to a lot of Polish bazaars because my grandmother was Polish. And although I loved it there, it was a playground for kids. There was every now and then there would be this old crotchety, mean witch of a person. This one woman in particular that I really couldn't stand. She was very judgmental, kind of sick personality, kind of a cruel personality. And she would, out of the nowhere, even though she hardly knew me, would just say the nastiest, most judgmental thing for the sake of being mean. At least it's the only way I could describe it. She would say something like, I don't know, why are you wearing that shirt? It makes you look desperate. That kind of like, what the hell are you talking about? Like, but it's a type of cruelty that sticks. Somebody who really had to go out of their way to say something mean, in a way that very often in you don't often hear in people. She had a particular gift to be a real horrible person. Well, I wanted to inject that kind of judgmental, venomous tongue into the character. Following that, I have over on the left right now, because I keep flipping my canvas, the big fat guy, which is Suppression, which is based on a bully that I knew when I was young. Even though I was a big kid, I ended up being 6'3", so I was always one of the taller kids. There's this really big older kid, kind of reminded me of Biff from Back to the Future, who would take joy in kicking kids into a puddle and then holding them down under his foot. Big, heavy, massive guy. And I wanted to capture the mass of somebody who is so heavy and so imposing that if they held you down, you could not get up. And so I'm pushing that narrative in that character as well. All right. And as far as the metallic pieces, that's going to be a main narrative aesthetic where each one of these characters kind of, quote unquote, fashions their own devices, their own fashion statement through metal, and the fashion statement is suffering, right? And that fashion statement suggests that they inflict a certain type of pain to themselves or to you through the use of metal, and that is their way of personal expression, right? Is their own identity. The identity is portrayed through their personal aesthetic. So that's it. That's all the description I'm going to give you for now. We have more videos following where you're going to see me get more into depth about technicalities and stuff like that. But now you know where we're coming from. And that, to me, is truly the most important part. So thanks for watching, everybody.